Today, this gender fluid TikToker is proud that they confuse normal people. Take a listen.
I find it quite funny when cis people see me and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry if this offends you, but like, I just can't tell if you're a boy or a girl. Like, no, baby, that doesn't offend me. That's by design. It's not offensive, it's on purpose.
Oh?
I dress and express myself with a specific intent of confusing cis people. And it works. And it feeds my ego and it gives me gender euphoria. Thank you, have a nice day.
So, Zerzem just said the quiet part out loud. Kudos for honesty, I guess, but you just basically admitted that this whole thing was just about your narcissism and your ego, and that's not a great look, babe. Not a great look. I mean, you get euphoria from confusing people. That doesn't seem healthy. That doesn't seem well adjusted or like you have a strong internal sense of self if you need to confuse and mislead other people to validate yourself somehow and make yourself feel good. That doesn't seem like a healthy, emotionally stable adult's perspective on the world. It just doesn't. I mean, that's not an identity. That's not an immutable characteristic like being gay or being black that's somehow worthy of protection or an identity in any real sense. That's just like a unique and specific, somewhat parasocial fetish. And that's fine. But what does that have to do with me as a gay person and my rights and my acceptance? Because I'm constantly told by the alphabet people that this kind of thing is a core part of my community and my rights and my acceptance, but I'm not seeing it. And of course, dress however you want. Gender bend till the cows come home. I don't care. Androgyny doesn't bother me whatsoever. But you then, of course, can get mad if people misgender you, which, at least in fairness, it doesn't sound like this person does. But if you do go out there very androgynous looking or looking like the other sex, people are going to make mistakes, and then you have no right to be mad about that. And you should be doing that because that's what makes you feel good, or that's just your style or your fashion or whatever. You shouldn't be doing that because you get a thrill out of confusing or deceiving other people. That's where things here get weird. I'm just so tired of this gender nonsense, and I feel like it's just an anchor dragging down normal LGBT people at this point. I really do. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, and do hit that like button to reward my suffering. Today, a TikToker is here to lecture us about fat phobia and how we have to stop saying that being fat is unhealthy. Let's take a look.
Stop disguising your fat phobia as a concern for the health of fat people. If you were actually concerned with our health, you wouldn't be fat phobic. Instead of repeating the fat equals unhealthy rhetoric, you would actually call it out when you see it. Because not only is it not true, it dissuades those of us who are fat from seeking healthcare. And medical fat phobia decreases the quality of the healthcare that we receive when we do seek it. Medical fat phobia that exists because our society is fat phobic. So if you care about my health or the health of any fat person, if you truly care, then fight fat phobia. Don't go around repeating fat phobic stereotypes.
Excuse me, being fat is unhealthy. Incredibly so. It's one of the leading causes of preventable deaths in the US. It causes all sorts of health problems, from diabetes to high blood pressure to heart issues. These are just facts. These aren't fat-phobic stereotypes. What on earth are you talking about? This notion of fat phobia is just incoherent and misleading because you're lumping in all sorts of things under this term that you're trying to label as some form of bigoted, including facts. Facts can't be bigoted, babe. That's not how that works. Now, I do totally agree that bullying people or shaming them for how their bodies work isn't kind, isn't justified, and it doesn't even help. Oftentimes, it does not help people make healthier choices or get onto a better track. It pushes them deeper into the emotional despair or issues that are causing them to overeat in the first place in many cases. So I don't support shaming or bullying, and please do not go after this woman in my comments. We just are going to disagree with what she's saying. And I also actually do acknowledge a grain of truth in this idea of medical issues that overweight people face. Oftentimes, they do have uncomfortable or unpleasant experiences in medical settings, and sometimes doctors miss issues that they're having because they hyper-focus on their weight and they just look at that. And that's valid. I'm not necessarily discounting that, though I can also see from the doctor's perspective that being overweight causes so many health issues that it would be obviously very tempting to want to look at that as a source because it's the most likely source, but it's not always the only thing going on. And I have heard from a lot of people who are overweight over the years about their negative experiences in medical settings, and I acknowledge that. That's unfortunate. We should try to improve that. But conflating those valid concerns with the idea that saying being fat is unhealthy is bigotry is absurd. You're discrediting any legitimate points you might have by this nonsensical reality denialism and gaslighting. And it's hilarious to me because this kind of person is probably the same type that told us follow the science and listen to Dr. Fauci and all that in cases where they really weren't actually going off much of science. But on an issue like the health issues associated with obesity, where there's just mountains of evidence and mountains of science demonstrating this obvious fact, they're now telling us that that's a bigoted stereotype. Give me a break. I'm not fat phobic in the sense that I have no hate or animus towards overweight people. I have compassion for them, and I'd like to see them make better choices and live longer, better, happier lives. But if your definition of fat phobic is thinking being fat is unhealthy and wanting to encourage people to change and make better choices so that they live longer lives, then you know what? F it. I'm fat phobic. I don't care. Proudly fat phobic. At some point, these influencers are going to have to give up on this game of just throwing around bigotry accusations instead of making actual arguments, because it's getting tired and nobody's buying it anymore. What do you guys think of this wild video? Let me know in the comments below, and do hit that like button to reward my suffering through this sheer stupidity. Today, a TikToker is openly calling for the destruction and downfall of the United States of America. And not in a hyperbolic way, she literally means it.
People say, like, death to America, this country needs to not exist. They're not being hyperbolic. That is like that is a tangible, like, direct end goal. That if y'all want to see Palestine freed, if you want climate change to literally not be a thing, if you want the genocide of Black Americans and indigenous folks on Turtle Island to stop occurring, this country literally needs to not exist.
So if you're as confused as I am right now, I stopped and I looked this up. Turtle Island is apparently what woke people who like don't recognize the validity of civilization call North America. So she's suggesting that there is an ongoing genocide of Black and indigenous people in North America today. Let's keep going, I guess.
There's no negotiating, there's no concessions. Like, this country literally needs to be abolished. That's not a figurative statement. That is like an end goal, and will inevitably happen. And we are currently on course for that to happen. Same sense of like capitalist realism of like people cannot conceptually imagine a world in which capitalism does not exist, in which there is an entire mode of operating society and operating of world building outside of this current system. There's like American realism, like American empire realism. Like, people genuinely cannot think of what would the world look like if America does not exist anymore. Because America is like a baby in the span of human history. It's like an infant, if that. And in its like infancy, look how much destruction and terror has occurred. Like, we are literally like on a global scale, like since 1492, like that's when the apocalypse started. I'm not even joking. And the thing about like that is like there have been many apocalypses. There have been many. There's not just one. There's been many throughout history. We're living through another one. It feels like the big major one, but like this is, yeah.
Babe, put down the crack pipe. You've had enough. There's so much to unpack here. I mean, the idea that climate change wouldn't exist, wouldn't be a thing, wouldn't be a problem without America is just nonsensical and untrue. China is actually the single biggest emitter of CO2 in the world. So, and we're supposed to believe that without America, the rest of the world would just all become kumbaya green energy. They'd just have solar panels and everything. China would shut down all their coal plants. Russia would go green. Like, babe, the Delulu is showing, okay? And this idea that black people are being genocided in modern day America is just insane. What is she even talking about? I'm not one to deny that racism is still a problem. There's still issues and inequities we need to address. But at the same time, there's really never been a better time to be a black person with more opportunity and more economic chances and prospects than there is in the year 2024 in America. I mean, this whole take and this whole video and this whole aesthetic reeks of just American privilege. Only somebody who grew up in a relatively incredibly free and prosperous country would ever have the audacity to think like this, because only they could take for granted everything we have here and what a beautiful, amazing country this is in so many ways, and be so quick to cast it out and want to see it all destroyed. And it's really terrible because it takes so long to build something, but it doesn't take nearly as long to destroy things. And actually, girly, a lot of people can conceptualize a non-capitalist society because they've witnessed it firsthand, because they're not 19 years old or whatever. They lived through the 20th century and they saw the horrors of socialism and communism and the massive death tolls and body counts that they took in China, in the Soviet Union, and beyond. They don't have to imagine a world without capitalism. They lived it, and it was terrible. People today have the same experience. I firsthand met people who fled Venezuela after that country was destroyed by a socialist dictator to the point of insane hyperinflation. And they flee to America and they are so grateful to be here and they can see what a wonderful country this is. But people like you can't see that. And you think somehow the rest of us just can't imagine a world without capitalism. No, babe, the ones who can imagine it because they've freaking seen it are the ones who appreciate America the most. Ooh, this stuff really gets me fired up because she spreads this to thousands and thousands of impressionable young people, and a lot of them just eat it up. Here are some of the comments. Death to America and land back would solve 99% of the world's problems. The person writes, US first, then England, France, Germany, Netherlands, Russia, etc. No, cuz literally, why can't I have an Xbox and a house for free? Why do we need money? America/capitalism is the most prolific cancer to ever exist. Capitalism equals infinite growth. Cancer equals uncontrollable growth. Oh my God. I don't know how to help these people. They might be beyond helping. They might. I mean, I'm sure some of them can still be reached, but some of them are too, I think, have drunk too much of the Kool-Aid. They're beyond the point of rescue. Now, this young woman did say one thing in her video that is actually true and correct and important, that America is a relatively young country. This experiment, especially because we've only really been free since after the Civil War, this experiment in human freedom and liberty is young and it is precious and it is vulnerable. It is not guaranteed to continue. We have to fight to preserve it, like Ronald Reagan famously said. But instead, somehow we have young people, at least in some pockets of the internet, who've taken everything we have here for granted so much that they would burn down the kind of society that millions and millions of human beings for centuries and centuries could never have dreamed would be possible. That is bleak. I don't have any other words for it. It is bleak. What do you think of this video and this sentiment more broadly? Let me know in the comments.
Neopronouns make us look like a joke and bring down the queer movement. Actually,
Yes.
neopronouns are the queer movement, you fucking idiot. The queer movement is about unapologetically being yourself, even if it doesn't make sense to other people. Does that sound familiar? Neopronouns don't make sense to a lot of people, and that's okay. It doesn't have to make sense to you. That's the point of being queer. Queerness is an extremely personal journey and identity. Everyone is going to identify differently. Not everyone is going to fit into your boxes of what a queer person looks like or identifies as. The point of the queer movement is to be yourself, whether or not people think it's weird and whether or not people think that you're valid. It's about being you. You know what really brings down the queer movement? People saying that transgender people expressing themselves brings down the queer movement. You are invalidating and bringing down your own community and then claiming to be an activist when you're actually doing the opposite, believe it or not. Brush up on queer history, go to a gay bar. Love ya!
Oh boy, don't you just love the condescending, schmarmy tone of this? Really, really delightful stuff. Argument here is just so absurd. Neopronouns are the queer movement. Well, if by queer you're talking about gay and transgender people, then that is just obviously objectively not true. Something that TikTok made up a couple of years ago can't be the core essence of a movement that's been around for decades and decades and decades. I mean, find me one person at the Stonewall riots from the historical record that was out here using Zer pronouns. And I just totally reject this idea that the queer movement or the queer community is all about just being yourself no matter what. No, that's completely vague and broad. It's about something very specific. It's about the freedom to love other people of the same sex and not be stigmatized for it. It's about the freedom of two adults to love each other and build a family and not be discriminated against or hated on just because of the fact that they're both members of one biological sex, and that's not the traditional norm. And to another extent, it's been broadened to include the rights of individuals who identify or want to live as a gender other than their biological sex. But it doesn't have anything to do with it about just being whoever you are on the inside or whatever all that nonsense is. That's complete, vague, woke gobbledygook. And the more you expand and stretch the meaning of something, the more you dilute the significance of it and the actual powerfulness and potence of its message. I mean, what's the logical limit of this argument? Because at some point it's got to give, right? You can't seriously be telling us that if somebody tells us they identify as a cat and they want to start using meow's pronouns, that we've got to go along with that or we're bigots. So I got to start what? Scratching their ears and giving them treats, or I'm some new kind of homophobe or queer phobe? That's just not reasonable. You're not making a winning argument there, babe. You're just not. Also, screw this idea that we can't critique people just because we're in the same community, because that certainly hasn't stopped the queer types from criticizing me over the years. And besides, you should never be in a cult. If you can't critique or push back or disagree with members of your own community, then you're not in a community, you're in a cult. This whole video just reeks of cope. It is an objective fact that the extremes of the gender movement, both neopronouns but also extreme radical trans stuff, is dragging down support for LGBT acceptance. That's just a fact. It's what's happening. And people like this don't like it, so they're trying to gaslight us and rewrite history and somehow tell us that we're traitors if we question their ever-expanding boundaries into new radical, incoherent, and nonsensical territory. No, and actually, you're the one that really needs to do some self-reflection because you're bringing about great harm, whether you realize it or not. But what do you guys think? Am I just neo-pronoun phobic, or am I on to something here? Let me know in the comments.
Hi, so this is your husband, boyfriend, partner, etc. You know the drill. Hi. You are so masculine and you're so strong. You want to know what would take it to the next level? Is when someone's not done talking, you wait for them to stop talking before you say words. It's so masculine to wait and to listen. Yeah, and to listen. And sometimes you don't have to say things.
So, there's a lot to unpack there, but that just made my skin crawl. The whole thing is just painfully cringeworthy, and it's so condescending as a man. Like, why are you speaking to adult men as if they're toddlers? And why do you possibly think that's going to compel them or speak to them rather than repulse them, offend them, and push them in the opposite direction? I mean, I can't imagine a better way to make people not take your advice. And that's what bothers me about this video is I actually agree with the point that not all, but a lot of men do interrupt women very often and do have a habit of speaking over women in workplace conversations and other things. I've observed it myself where my coworker or colleague will say something and then everyone will not notice it. And then I'll say the same thing 5 minutes later and they'll be like, oh, good idea. This is a thing. Sexism and these kinds of habits are real, but this seems like the worst possible way to try to address them because it just makes men feel defensive and condescended to, and it's insulting and reductive and just seems to have the absolute opposite of the intended effect. Speaking down to straight men and villainizing them and honestly like treating them like they're idiots and acting like everything about them is wrong and problematic, rightly or wrongly, and I don't support this, but that's why we have Andrew Tate. That's why we have the red pill movement, the extremes of which are openly sexist and very hateful towards women. Well, that didn't come out of nowhere. It didn't pop into existence out of a vacuum. It happened because a lot of men out there feel condescended to and feel judged and feel attacked and feel like there's not a way that they're allowed to be masculine and not be judged for it or not be viewed as problematic or whatever. And stuff like this does not help. Maybe it's meant somewhat as a joke, but it's really not funny, and it really does rub men the wrong way. And then 5 minutes later, people like this will be like, oh my God, why are all these men going red pill and becoming so toxic? It's like, well, you kind of push them into the hands and the arms of those toxic people in a way over the years with this really just annoying and maddening and insulting content. It didn't, I'm not saying that excuses it. I still think people should be smart enough to reject toxic ideologies like that peddled by the Andrew Tates of the world, but it does explain it to some extent. And it seems to me that you should be wiser than to engage in this kind of thing if what you actually want to see is harmony between the sexes, for sure. But I don't think that's what people like this actually want to do. They know that the people who are liking and clicking on this and sharing it is all just women, and the men who see it will just be annoyed by it for the most part, or offended by it. And they don't care though, because they'll get views, they'll get some money from it, they'll build a brand off it. And if it actually in some small way just makes gender relations worse and antagonizes men, okay, well, I'm doing fan service for a female audience and I'm profiting from it. So hope that's worth it for you, babe. I hope that is. And this isn't some aberration. It's unfortunately typical of this person's content. This TikToker makes videos like this all the time. It's like a little content niche or trend, and I just find it incredibly, incredibly obnoxious and destructive. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe you found this video lovely and delightful. Do feel free to let me know.